Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. It is a Tuesday afternoon. It's the 19th day of January in the year 2016, and we welcome you to this program. I want to apologize for our late start today. We're about 12 minutes late getting into our program. That was for me. Our Rotary program today was we were on a field trip. We were touring Appalachian Bible College, which is a college right on the outskirts of Beckley, and by the time we got through it was about 15 after 1, and I knew that I couldn't make it back home in time to get on the air at 1:30. So that's my explanation for the late start today, and I apologize. It is a pleasure to be with you today. I'm going to forego giving you the phone number because very honestly, I'm not getting any audio on my end, so I hope you're hearing me fine. I, for whatever reason, am not hearing, and because we're running a little bit late, I really did not want to delay any longer in our start time. So we're kind of running. I'm running kind of blind here. I'm getting a signal from the studio that the audio is rock solid to the stream so that we need not worry about the sound. You're hearing me fine. I'm just not able to communicate. So I'm going to forego giving you the phone number today because if you call, I won't be able to hear you. But I do encourage you to communicate with us if you are so inclined. You still do have access to email. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN, 906@gmail.com. And again, I do encourage you to take advantage of our Facebook page. If you are a regular user of Facebook and you go to the homepage of Facebook, just type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and you will have access. You will be on our Facebook page, and there are a number of postings there that I've put up over the last month or so that I think really do solicit comment and commentary on your part. Some of them are quite opinionated, intentionally so, because I am looking for reactions and responses. In fact, at the beginning, once I finish the introduction here, I want to share with you a post that I put on Facebook last evening related to yesterday's program. And if nothing else, it's a good summary of the second hour of yesterday's program as well. So, but the point I'm making is please feel free to comment and offer your suggestions and your comments on these posts. I believe that on Facebook there is a place for you to do that, to make comments. If you are inclined and you want to react in a little bit more lengthy way, then by all means feel free to send me an email. Again, my email address, waobrien, OBRIEN, 906@gmail.com. And, you know, hopefully by tomorrow we'll have our audio back and our sound back, and I'll be able to hear you on the phone. I'm trusting that once we get beyond today's program, Bob and I will be able to work together and work out the kinks, whatever they might be in the system. Anyway, it is a pleasure to be with you on this very sunny but very cold January day on a Tuesday. I will share with you just a comment that we were very, very fortunate to be invited, our Rotary Club, to share and enjoy lunch at Appalachian Bible College, and a number of presentations by officials at the college on its history and on its situation, its status, and its contributions not only to this community, but to the world at large. They pointed out that their graduates, their missionary graduates, are scattered throughout the world. There are Appalachian Bible graduates on every continent, and the impact that the college has had on this community is extremely strong. It's considered to be one of this community's best citizens, as it were. One of the most, and I think this is a credit to the institution, one of the most flattering things and really unusual things about Appalachian Bible College is that it was founded 66 years ago, in 1950. And the current president, Dr. Anderson, is only the second president. He's been president of the institution since 1983. So what that means is he's been president for 33 of the 66 years, exactly half. So the original president, I believe his name was Dr. Pitkin. It's rare that an institution that's been in existence more than 65 years has only had two presidents. I think that's a credit to both of them. The college has grown. It is flourishing. It began with a graduating class in 1953 of 7 students, and there are now 300 students housed on that campus, and it's an absolutely glorious place to visit. It's one of the, I'll tell you, the experience that I've had that mirrors it. If any of you have ever been to Boston, and more specifically Cambridge, Massachusetts, to the campus of Harvard University, which is located right at Harvard Square in Cambridge, if you walk through the square with all the traffic and the lights and the horns and all the noise, and you walk inside those walls onto that campus, it's almost like walking into a different world. It is so quiet and so peaceful and so delightful. And that's the same feeling that I get, because I've been to Appalachian Bible College 3 or 4 different times. That's the same feeling there. When you drive onto that campus, you just get this sense of peace and joy. I mean it. It really does indeed work. It's a wonderful place. And so with that, I welcome you to today's program. It's obviously an abbreviated program. We're already at 50 minutes after the hour, so we've only got an hour and 10 minutes of program left today. But that's, I believe, enough to really get into some what I think is interesting and hopefully a little bit juicy material, if juicy is the proper word. The first thing that I wanted to do, and especially for those who were not able to be with us yesterday, is to basically bring us up to date as to where we are and as we begin our discussion today and how we got here. And that necessitates a brief review of our program yesterday. You will recall, if you were with us yesterday, that in our first hour of programming, we've completed our issue of the John Paul Stevens dissent in the Supreme Court case of District of Columbia versus Heller. The last really substantive piece of evidence we looked at was an extensive commentary paragraph from Joseph Story's commentaries written in 1833 on the Second Amendment. And the reason that particular passage was so significant was because Justice Antonin Scalia cites Justice Story and a sentence from that particular paragraph in order to justify the court's majority decision in the Heller case by focusing on the right to bear arms. What Justice Stevens points out is that Justice Scalia took that one sentence out of context. And when you read the entire paragraph within which that sentence is located, you begin to realize that Justice Story is saying exactly the opposite of what Justice Scalia claims he is saying in the majority opinion. The sentence that Justice Scalia cites seems to support the idea that the right to keep and bear arms is really the focus, the key passage, if you will, of the Second Amendment. What Justice Story is saying in the entire paragraph is, even though it appears that way, the reality is that the context, namely within a well-regulated militia, really is the only way to understand substantively what the founders meant in the Second Amendment. And we closed out our first hour. My conclusion was that there's absolutely no question in my mind that Justice Stevens's dissenting opinion in the Heller case is substantially more substantive than is the majority opinion. And Justice Stevens himself calls the majority opinion strained and I can't remember the other adjective that he uses, but indeed it is. It's strange logic, and Justice Scalia has to do some pretty fast manipulating with words in order to make the case that he makes, in order to reach the court's majority opinion in Heller. I think, again, if we do have a substantial change in the makeup of the court in the coming years, I believe that Heller will be overturned. I believe that a court comprised principally of objective juridical jurists, when they look at that case and look at the evidence, they will realize that there's a lot more evidence against or for the minority in the Heller decision, as represented by Justice Stevens in his dissenting opinion, than there was for the majority. That was our first hour yesterday. In our second hour, we began to address the issues of America's two-party system, and we were introduced to what I think is the excellent book written by Richard Hofstadter in 1969, entitled The Idea of a Party System. And we spent quite a bit of time talking about the title itself. And in fact, the better part of our hour we spent talking about the title itself, along with the opening paragraph on the faceplate, which is a short passage, a short rhyme, if you will, from Thomas Macaulay, the famous British historian of the 18th century. So with that, let me share with you what I put on Facebook last evening, because what I posted on Facebook was what I believe to be a summary of the program we did yesterday, namely the title of the book and the significance of the party system in general. So let me take a moment and share this with you. And for those listening who were not able to be with us yesterday, this particular piece, I think, this particular posting from Facebook will provide what I think is a fairly comprehensive summary of where we were yesterday, and then that'll give us the opportunity to take off from that point today and continue looking at the issue of two parties in American politics. We're going to begin with the rhyme, the passage from Thomas Macaulay. Then none was for a party, then all were for the state. Then the great man helped the poor, and the poor man loved the great. Let me repeat that again, because I don't think I read it with the proper emphasis where it ought to be. Then none was for party. Then all were for the state. Then the great man helped the poor, and the poor man loved the great. These remarkable words, penned by British historian Thomas Babington Macaulay, graced the faceplate of Richard Hofstadter's 1969 classic, The Idea of a Party System, and not without reason. And then I basically go into the title of Hofstadter's book. The operative words in Hofstadter's title are idea and system, the idea of a party system. The two key words, of course, are idea and system. The first, idea, tells us that this book deals a good deal in theory, lots of philosophy, undoubtedly a good bit of abstraction as well. More to the point, it informs the prospective reader that the book's ultimate accomplishment is to propose, defend, and, in the best of all worlds, present a persuasive case on a likely solution to a serious problem. In other words, the very idea, the word itself, idea, of a party system suggests that what Hofstadter is going to do is address a proposal or a solution to some problem. And so basically, that's implied in Hofstadter's use of the word idea. The second key word, system, suggests just what that recommended solution will entail. In this case, the problem is party, political party. To address it successfully, Hofstadter implies, before we've opened even the first page of the book, is to accept it as a reality. Stop trying to make it go away and make it an integral part of our overall political process. So the first thing that we need to think about when we come to the idea of the word system is that in order to address the problem seriously, the first thing Hofstadter has to do is encourage us to get over the negatives associated with the word party. And of course, this comes from the quote above. Then none was for a party. Then all were for the state. Then the great men helped the poor, and the poor man loved the great. In other words, Macaulay's suggestion here is that in England, when there weren't political parties, times were good. The system worked well. The poor envied the great, loved the great took care of the poor. Everybody was supportive of the state, and there were no divisions, there were no parties. Times were good. So the implication there, of course, is that party is a very bad thing. Party is a negative. So Hofstadter's use of the word system suggests that if the solution to the problem of party is system, then before you can approach system, you've got to get rid of the negatives associated with party. As long as you're convinced that party is bad and you can't do anything about it, then you never get to the solution that Hofstadter wants to talk about, which is system. So the first thing, in order to address it successfully, Hofstadter says, the first thing you've got to do before you've even opened the first page of the book is to accept party as a reality. Stop trying to make it go away, and instead make it an integral part of your overall political process. Accept the existence of party, the reality of party. In other words, accept the fact that party, known also as faction, interest group, organized self-interest, gang, crew, corps, whatever word you want to use that suggests a self-interested faction or political party, will always be with us. Sown into the nature of man, James Madison told us in Federalist number 10. In other words, parties are natural. They're sown into the nature of man. You can't get rid of them. You may wish they didn't exist, but the fact of the matter is they always did and they always will. So as Hofstadter said, if party is a problem, then before you can solve it, you've got to deal with the reality that it's always going to be there. And what Hofstadter is suggesting is, once you accept the reality that's going to be there, then you find a way to deal with it. And that's kind of where Hofstadter is taking us. No way to prevent faction from forming, James Madison told us. So our best bet is to find a way to control its effects. if you remember Federalist number 10, since the elimination you can't get rid of the causes, you can't do anything about the causes of faction, what we must concentrate on then is controlling their effects. It's obvious here that we are using the word party and the word faction as if they were exactly the same thing, simultaneously. They are the same thing. And I think that's significant, because when we talk about system, we're going to talk about a quite different thing. So there's no way to prevent them, Madison told us. Our best bet is to find a way to control the effects of factions. But system goes further than mere acceptance. By regularizing its existence and building it into your total operation, our total operation, we successfully turn a negative into a positive good. In other words, it's one thing to accept their reality and control their effects. But there's even a next stage. And the next stage is to so construct your system that you take the reality of party, the reality of faction, and you turn it around from a negative to a positive. You not only look at it as a problem, you find a way to turn it into a good thing. Hofstadter tells us how that will work in the subtitle of his book, The Rise of Legitimate Opposition. So long as party was seen as a negative, so long as it was considered something bad that should be eliminated, there was no room in our republic for opposition, for any alternative points of view. There was but one drumbeat, and all were expected to march to it. But when it became, and that's what the quote from Macaulay above says, that then, in the good old days, then, there was no party. Then everybody supported the state. Everybody was for the state. Then great men helped the poor. Then the poor man loved the great. In other words, those were the good old days. The implication is before the existence of party. Madison points out to us there's no such thing as before the existence of party. Party is sewn into the nature of man. It's always there and it always will. So you might as well deal with it. And Madison's way to deal with it is to find a way to control the effects of factions so that they can't carry out their negative purpose, their negative agenda. But when Hofstadter uses the word system, he's talking about something beyond just accepting the existence of party. He's talking about turning party from a negative to a positive. Excuse me, I'm getting tongue-tied here. There was but one drumbeat. I basically read that. When party becomes part of the total political system, the republic has not only learned to accept its existence, but has established a demand for it. Rather than something only to be tolerated, party as system has become necessary to the overall operation of the total political process. It's now become legitimate. And so the full title of Hofstadter's book is The Idea of a Party System, The Rise of Legitimate Opposition in the United States. So in a sense then, party implies division, difference, opposition, a different point of view, a different position on issues, differences of opinion. The whole idea of legitimate opposition is that you take the reality of the fact that there will be and always is an opposition, and you turn that into a positive by incorporating it as a legitimate part of your overall political operation. And that's, in Hofstadter's view, the idea of a political system. The way to solve the problems of political parties is to legitimize their existence and reform your political system accordingly around them. So how does Macaulay's rhyme fit into this scenario? Clearly, it tells us that Macaulay speaks here for those who oppose party. In fact, it places him in the forefront of those who believe that loyalty to the state and concern of the groups within that state for each other is the optimum situation. No opposition, only community and a virtuous citizenry, all willing to put the differences aside in the interests of unity. What Macaulay is describing for us is the ideal world without party. He has yet to accept that party is inevitable. James Madison did accept it and designed our Constitution to deal with it by controlling the effects of party. Imagine, and this is kind of my commentary on this whole thing. This is pretty much what we did yesterday in our second hour. My concluding comment here is on the significance of all of this, just focusing on the cover of the book, the title and subtitle of the book itself. Imagine all this just from the book's title, plus its opening page. Imagine how much we can learn from reading the book itself, reading what's in it. If we can encourage our young people to work a book title and the book jackets in this way, think of what we could do. It seems that our problems with reading comprehension would begin to disappear. At least we'd be beyond the old adage, I read, but I can't understand what I'm reading. And how many times have I heard that in the years that I was teaching history classes? Have you read the book? I read it and I read it and I read it, but I can't understand what they're talking about. Comprehension. So let me pause for a moment, or just a moment. I'm not going to make this the feature of our entire program today, but in the last 10 years or so that I was teaching before I retired, I started to do a workshop on how to read. Now, basically, I was talking to college freshmen, principally college freshmen. By definition, if they are college freshmen, if they've been admitted to college, they can read. But the fact of the matter is, we know that the ability to read well continues to challenge us as a society. We have a literate society in that most of our people can read. But the fact of the matter is, there are a number of people who can read words who can't understand the meaning of what they're reading. And there are strategies, there are ways to work on this, to improve comprehension, the ability to comprehend and understand what you're reading. One way, and this is difficult, it'd be much easier if we were together and we could actually practice this on site together. But this way is a little bit difficult, but let me see if I can explain. One way to deal with the issue of comprehension is to look at the title of the chapter. If you're reading a textbook, look at the title of the chapter and focus principally on what the chapter is going to be about before you read it. The title of this chapter is XXXYZ. That means that this chapter is going to deal with the following, whatever the topic is. At that point, I know this seems like it would be a waste of time, But believe me, if you've ever spent time reading and rereading the same things over and over again, you can understand that a little bit of time invested at the front end might save you an awful lot of time later on. What I would suggest you do after you look at the title of the chapter or the subchapter, the subsection, the paragraph, whatever the particular unit is, take a blank sheet of paper and write down everything you know about that topic. Everything. Just spend your time focusing on nothing but that one topic, the title of the chapter that you're about to read. And write down everything you know about it. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, well, that's ridiculous. I haven't read the chapter yet, so I don't know anything about it. But let me suggest to you, yes, you do. You know more than you think you know. So what I'm saying is, before you read the first word of the chapter, write down on a piece of scratch paper everything you know about the subject. It may not be much. It may be wrong. But until you come across evidence that it's wrong, as far as you know, at this point, it's what you know. How does this improve comprehension? By taking that minute or two to write down what you know about the subject before you begin reading about it, your entire focus is on that particular subject. You know what you're going to be reading about before you read the first word. So consequently, what you're reading in that chapter is getting 100% of your attention. You don't have a comprehension problem at all, because your entire being, your entire focus is on that particular subject. You will be amazed at how your comprehension improves when you understand, before you read a sentence, what that sentence is about. You know that everything in the chapter is going to be about whatever the title is. So once you take the time to jot down what you know about that topic, then what you're doing is reading about something that you have made familiar to yourself. Thereby, you will solve a significant amount of your comprehension problems. And the few extra minutes that you seemingly wasted at the front end, you'll get back 10 times over. You won't have to reread. You won't have to go back and reread the same sentences over again. You'll be amazed. So what I'm saying here at the end of this piece that was on Facebook last night, it was put on Facebook last night, is all you need to do before you read the first word of Hofstadter's book on the idea of a party system, understand what the idea of a party system and the acceptance of the idea, the rise of legitimate opposition means. Once you understand that, then you understand an awful lot about party before you even read the first chapter. What it means is drawing from within yourself what you already know. You will be amazed at what you know. Plato said, everything worth knowing is already within man. The trick is to bring it out. The trick is to bring to the fore, put on the table right in front of you, what you already know, and then based on what you already know, go at learning more. And your problems of comprehension will disappear to a large extent. Obviously, if you're reading about a very, very difficult topic, if you're reading about a very sophisticated topic, if you're reading a book on nuclear science or brain surgery or outer space or some of these things, or biology or some of these things, and some of the words and some of the vocabulary will trip you up and all. We know that. We all know that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about reading the sentence and at the end of it not knowing what you read. Then go back and rereading it again. And some people do that 10 times. And finally they just close the book and say, I can't pass this course. This is over my head. That's the problem we've got to solve. And my point at the end of this particular passage or posting on Facebook is if we could teach students how to work a book title, how to work the jacket, the book jacket, how to work the table of contents. Can you imagine? Just open any book to the table of contents at the beginning and just look at the chapter titles, one after the other after the other. There's an outline of the book. And if you take the time to focus on the table of contents, you have a pretty good idea about what the whole book is about. The kind of evidence it deals with, the kind of conclusion it's heading toward, the kind of conclusion that the author reaches. Your appreciation of what you read will increase 10 times over. And that's my point. And I didn't mean to make that a significant part of today's program, but I think it's significant. Going back then, and this is the new part of today's program, and we're at 20 minutes after the hour, so we've got about 40 minutes left in our program today. But going back to Macaulay's rhyme, wouldn't the world be great without parties, is what Macaulay is saying. What James Madison told us is that there is no world without parties. Self-interest and factions are always with us. They are sown in the nature of man. James Madison's challenge was, we need to find a way to control their effects. In other words, we need to find a way that their negative goals are not accomplishable. That even though factions are there and they're trying to get their own way and satisfy their own self-interest, what we need to do is build in some system, some way that factions can't work their magic. Thus, Madison's separation of powers and checks and balances system within the Constitution of the United States. In the overall meaning then, or history or story of political parties, what we're looking at then are three different approaches, three different ways of looking at the history of political parties. The first one is to try to pretend that they're not there or abolish them, get rid of them. The second one is to deal with the reality that they're always with us and find a way to control them. And then the third strategy is to take the reality of parties as a fact of life, and make the kind of accommodations to that reality that builds the existence of parties into your overall political process. And that's what Hofstadter is talking about when he talks about the idea of a party system. Systematize parties. don't just accept them and can try to control them or freeze them into a corner or something. Build them into your overall operation in such a way that if they're always going to be there anyway, you use them in such a way that they work to your advantage rather than your disadvantage. Those are the three ways that we can look at political parties. It's obvious to me in our history that we have gone through each of those three. The third one, which is making them a key part of your overall political process, is creating or initiating the idea of what Hofstadter calls a legitimate opposition, the loyal opposition. Building your republic in such a way that free speech and the right of people with different points of view, different opinions, to speak, to assemble, to have access to the media, have the opportunity to speak their mind and get their opinion out there in the public sector, is really what our legitimate opposition is all about. So in a sense, what we've gone through here in American history in relation to political parties, we have gone from the point where we tried to abolish them or pretended that we could abolish them, through the point where we realized we couldn't and tried to control them, which is Madison's Constitution, until the third stage where we finally, by the early 19th century, reached the point where parties become a key part of our overall political operation. That's the theme of Hofstadter's book. The history of political parties is the story of going from one stage to the next stage to the next stage. The point that I was trying to make at the end of our program yesterday, and I want to make it again today because it's one that you can't overemphasize, and that's this. Once you make political parties a key part of your overall political process, once you build the concept of legitimate opposition into your political system, you've not only found a way to deal with it, you've reached the point where you got to have it. In other words, your system can only function when there are debates and differences of opinion. When you reach the point where everybody is of the same opinion, which you can't do, but if you could, then the only thing that you can do with opposition is to crush it. What am I saying? I am saying that without the operation of our two-party system, without the competition between two major parties, organizing our citizenry into two large camps, and opening up the process to a system of votes and majority wins and all of the stuff that we take for granted in our election system, that's the only way that our system can work. And what we find, and I went through a little bit of this yesterday in the program now that I think about it, if you look at the history of American elections, Whenever one party totally overwhelms the other, whenever the struggle between our two major parties is not competitive, where the power of one party is so much superior to the party of another that the minor party, the second party, is crushed in the election, crushed at the polls, where one party wins the White House, wins control of the House of Representatives, wins control of the Senate, controls most of the state governments, etc., etc. In other words, has practically crushed the opposition. That's not success for us, that's a problem. Because our system is built on the idea of legitimate opposition, on the idea of competition of ideas. And people's political freedom, if you will, is the right to go in different directions and change parties and go from this to that. The fact that there is choice. Whenever there isn't any, whenever the position of one party is so overwhelming in relationship to the other one, choice is eliminated. There's no such thing as free choice. And consequently then, what we are left with is the situation when somebody does come along who disagrees with the opposition, they are silenced, they are crushed. In other words, the majority obliterates or discriminates against minorities. One of the things that we've talked about, one of the things that Madison talked about in the Federalist Papers, is the idea of minority rights. What makes minority rights work is that the minority has to be significantly important. It has to be viable. The greatest danger in our political system, John Stuart Mill saw this, is the tendency of the majority to overwhelm and silence the minority. In other words, to discriminate against minorities. And I'm not just talking about racial minorities here. I'm talking about any kind of minority. When the power of the majority becomes too strong, too powerful, it so overwhelms the competing positions that all the things that we associate with political freedom and free speech and the right to free press and the right to, all of those things disappear. Let me give you one example. The Cold War in the 1950s and early 60s, after World War II. The threat of international communism. The idea that international communism was out to destroy free enterprise, was out to destroy capitalism. The sense that was afoot all over our country at the time, that communism's one goal is to destroy us. The scene of Nikita Khrushchev standing in the United Nations, banging his shoe on the table, saying, "We will bury you." That's the world, that was the world of the Cold War, living in America at the time of the Cold War. Most people were convinced that that was true. Most people believed without a doubt that international communism was committed to the destruction of our way of life. Our whole political process agreed with that. Our political parties agreed with that. What people voted on in election times was which party was best able to protect us from the threat of international communism. Not that one could and the other one accepted the legitimacy of communism. That was not even a given. That was not possible. What I'm suggesting is that the nation during the time of the Cold War was so fixed on the same page, people believing the same things, that to be a voice in the wilderness at that time, to disagree, was to be perceived as a threat. If you took the reality of communist commitment to destroy our way of life as a given, that anybody who questioned that probably is a communist, or at least is a communist sympathizer, or could be somebody who might become a communist. Because what you're dealing with is somebody that doesn't believe the dogma. That questions truth. And if you believe that what you stand for is truth, and if the vast majority of people in your nation or in your community or in your society agree with you, then by definition, they are going to set out to crush anyone who has a different definition of that truth. What my point is that the only way our two-party political system can work is when it works well. The closer our elections are, the more of our elections that end up 51% to 49%, or 50.6% to 49.4%. Those close elections, those nail biters, tell us that our system is functioning the way it ought to, the way it was designed, the way it was intended. What we have to do is find a way or recognize or learn how the nation reached the point of being convinced that parties were totally bad and shouldn't even exist, to the point where parties become necessary literally to the survival of our republic. Why is this important? I would suggest to you it's important because we are in a situation right now with the polarization that exists between our political parties, that the possibilities of negotiation, of deliberation, of compromise are gone. We have reached the point where our nation has become so divided that the political process has stopped working. Each side sees the other side as a threat to the nation's very survival, when in fact we know that's not true. We know that most people want the same things. We know that there's more things that we agree on than there are that divide us. But the political air is so highly charged that we're not willing to allow people to postpone the things they disagree on in order to work on the things that they do agree on. The idea is that to even talk to people in the other party is disloyal. To cross the aisle and work with the other party is weakness. It tells us that you really aren't committed to the principles of our party. And if you aren't 100% committed to our party, then you're dangerous. That's what we mean when we say it's an us versus them kind of situation. That's what it is. The fact of the matter is, if the idea of an opposition point of view, a loyal opposition, is to be legitimate, then what that suggests is that the system requires each side to work with the other side to deliberate the differences, to negotiate the different points of view, to compromise with each other, to find ways to get around the things that separate them in order to find points of agreement on the things that unite them. That's what our political system was created to do. That's why we need two parties. But the fact of the matter is, our system is currently inoperative. The Republican leadership blames President Obama. They seem to imply or suggest that once President Obama leaves office, the roadblock will be broken. And the nation, then both sides will be able to sit down and negotiate and work on budgets and health care and all these other things, immigration and all these other things. The fact of the matter is, the nation, the citizens of this nation, have become so polarized that we may be reaching the point where our political system can't function anymore. And if that's true, then we better know it. And that's why I believe that this particular topic about the nature of our two-party system is so incredibly important. So that's really the topic. That's really the subject. What I wanted to do is I wanted to look at some of the key pieces of historical evidence and share these together so that we can not only, many of them are things we already knew, but to put them into context, into this particular context, and to see them perhaps in ways that we haven't seen them before. One of the most important documents in early American history that gets a lot of attention in our textbooks is President George Washington's farewell address. Most people, if they know their history at all, if you ask them about Washington's farewell address, most people are going to say, oh, the farewell address is Washington's warning to the nation that America must be careful about entangling alliances. We have to keep our foreign policy options open so that we don't get roped into signing agreements with nations that put us in positions which we don't want to be in. The background for that, let me be, a little bit play a little bit historian here. The background for that was that when Washington delivered his farewell address in 1796, he had made the decision not to run for a third term. He was leaving office. But the nation was embroiled over what to do about the ongoing struggles in Europe between France and Great Britain. You'll recall that in 1789 was the storming of the Bastille and the outbreak of the French Revolution. In this country, there were a lot of people who supported France, who supported the ideals of the French Revolution. The most prominent leader of that group was Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson had spent many years in France. He was behind the French Revolution. He even helped write the Constitution for the revolutionary government that took office in 1789 after the overthrow of the crown. But early in the 90s, when the French Revolution moved from its idealism at the outset to the brutality of the guillotine, then many people in this country became very afraid of the French Revolution, because the revolutionary ideas being expounded in France, they believed threatened the situation in this country. What if the French Revolution came here? What if the poor in our cities rose up in armed mobs against government, against tax collectors, against political officials, against their leaders? What if real social revolution were to happen in this country? And many people backed off. And when France and England went to war in the 90s, many people felt that our future as a nation was better linked to Great Britain, to England, than it was to France. But Jefferson and those that supported Jefferson believed that our best interests and our loyalties needed to stick with France. After all, it was France that came to our aid and helped us win our independence. Not only that, but in 1778, we had entered a treaty, an alliance with France, in which we committed ourselves to not reach peace with England without France's knowing it. In other words, we would not make a secret deal to end the war, because what France was afraid of is that if they joined us and supported our fight for independence, and then we made a separate peace with England, France would be left hanging. Excuse me. So France wanted an agreement that we wouldn't back out, that we would go all the way. And we signed it in 1778. Many people believed then that we had an obligation to go to France's, to join France, to help France in its war against England. They also felt, why in the world would we want to support England? They're the ones that we had to fight a war against. So it turned out that those that we call Federalists, led by the most prominent figure, Alexander Hamilton, believed that the nation's best interests were to find a way to stay allied, stay connected with England. Our trade, our commerce, our need for manufactured goods, all of these things suggested that America's best interests would be served by sticking with the former mother country. The Jeffersonians, on the other hand, were much more inclined to support France. So in a sense, the war between England and France in the 1790s was splitting this nation in half. And that became really the makings of our second party system. It grew into the origins of the so-called Jeffersonian Republicans. It was the root of Jefferson's election as President of the United States in 1800. In other words, America's party system, two-party system as we know it, was fueled by this ongoing foreign policy struggle between England and France. So when Washington decided to not run for a third term, he decided to give his best advice to the people of America in what we ought to do. And in 1796, Washington delivered his famous farewell address. And in that address, he warned the nation about keeping our foreign policy options open and not getting enmeshed in entangling alliances. Of course, what he was referring to was the alliance of 1778 with France. And what he was saying is we can't allow ourselves to do that anymore. We have to leave our options open. In other words, we've got to conduct foreign policy as it best suits us, not other nations. So we've got to be able to maneuver. We've got to be free to move. We can't be locked in to long-term agreements and treaties which take away our opposition and suck us into foreign policy disasters that we really don't want to be in. If you ask most people about Washington's farewell address, that's what they would say it was about. And it is. I mean, there's no question. There's quite a bit in there about that. But the fact of the matter is, Washington also warned the nation about something else. And it was the emerging political party system that this foreign policy situation was producing. He saw the nation dividing into two camps over the war between France and England. And he used his farewell address to warn the nation against the dangers of parties. Going back to our discussion a moment ago, a little bit earlier then, Washington had not accepted the idea of a loyal opposition. He had not accepted the idea that opposition was legitimate. He believed what Macaulay was writing in that rhyme, that there's one government, it's a popular government, the people elect it, the people have an obligation to support it. If you don't agree with it, you're an enemy to the nation. You're guilty or potentially guilty of treason. That was the general impression that existed in the nation through the founding period and into the early national period, the early years under the Constitution. Washington thought that parties were bad. They were dangerous. We ought not to tolerate them. And a significant portion of his farewell address is devoted to the dangers of political parties. Let me share with you some of Washington's thinking as taken from his farewell address. It's quite a lengthy address. I've printed it out, and it prints out about eight pages or so. It's fairly substantial. About 20% of the way into this, Washington starts to talk about the strength of America being in its unity. We are all one nation. We are all one people. We all need to be marching to the same drumbeat. We all need to be moving in the same direction. There's no room in the American frame of reference for parties or divisions. And this is what he says. In contemplating the causes which may disturb our union, it occurs as a matter of serious concern that any ground should have been furnished for characterizing parties by geographical discriminations, northern and southern, Atlantic and Western, whence designing men may endeavor to excite a belief that there is a real difference of local interests and views. One of the expedients of party, he says, to acquire influence within particular districts is to misrepresent the opinions and aims of other districts. In other words, leaders of parties, by definition, spread negative things about other districts, about other parts of the nation, etc., because they want to divide us. You, he says, cannot shield yourselves too much against the jealousies and heartburnings which spring from these misrepresentations. They tend to render alien to each other those who ought to be bound together by fraternal affection. We're all one nation. We need to function as one nation. Our sections have their own unique qualities, but they all need to work together in combination. We need to preserve the union. And of course, what he's pointing out is parties tend to divide us, and therefore they are bad. The inhabitants of our Western country have lately had a useful lesson on this head. They have seen in the negotiations by the executive and in the unanimous ratification by the Senate of the treaty with Spain, and in the universal satisfaction of that event throughout the United States, a decisive proof how unfounded were the suspicions propagated among them of a policy in the general government and in the Atlantic states unfriendly to their interests in regards to the Mississippi River. This linked to the so-called Jay Treaty of 1795, where many people believed that the interests in the East were willing to sell out the settlers in the West by giving up control of the Mississippi to Spain, by selling them out, selling out the West, in exchange for commercial treaty with Spain. Washington claims that the treaty signed prevented that from happening. He said they have been witnesses to the formation of two treaties, that with Great Britain and that with Spain, which secure them everything they could desire. In other words, people did everything they could do to try to disparage our government and what it was doing in foreign policy. But the treaties we were able to negotiate with England and with Spain secured everything we might want. In other words, we've got to stick together. And then Washington goes into the issues of political party. He said, to the efficacy and permanency of our union, a government for the whole is indispensable. No alliance, however strict, between the parts can be an adequate substitute. They must inevitably experience the infractions and interruptions which all alliances in all times have experienced. This government, the offspring of our own choice, uninfluenced and unawed, adopted upon full investigation and mature deliberation, completely free in its principles, in the distribution of its powers, uniting security with energy and containing within itself a provision for its own amendment, has a just claim to your confidence and your support. In other words, what he's telling the American people is, don't be sucked into parties. Don't believe these people that are trying to divide us. This is a free government. The Constitution was ratified by the people. We all agreed that we were one nation and we would stick together and hang in there together, and Washington said we need to do that. So Washington has not yet accepted the concept or the idea of a legitimate opposition or a loyal opposition. In his frame of reference, in his way of thinking, if you disagree with the positions he's outlining here, you are an enemy to your nation. In other words, I think this is the best way to explain what the implications of what Washington's saying. There's no room in this nation, Washington is saying, for legitimate opposition, for dissent. Yeah, there's free speech, but you got to make sure that you say only what's acceptable. There's the right to publish. There's freedom of the press. But you better be damn careful what you write or what you say. And so, in a sense, there's no room in this political framework for the idea of differences of opinion. By definition, then, the system itself drives dissenters out of the system. It doesn't find a way to accommodate them. It drives them away. It forces them into the fringes. It forces people into back alleys. It forces people who don't agree with the nation's policies to become enemies to their own state, to their own nation. That's the implication of a nation without parties. Obviously, Washington can't see that. Thomas Macaulay couldn't see it. Jonathan Swift couldn't see it when he criticized parties. In other words, all those people who do not accept the legitimacy of party are saying that there's no room in this republic for dissent. You march to the drum that everybody else marches to, or you identify yourself as an enemy of your own nation and your own people. To thinking man, to thinking people, that worldview, that frame of reference is suicidal. I believe that Madison knew it. I believe that many other people did as well. We're at 58 minutes after the hour, and it's time we wind up our program today. But let me end with one piece of information which I think you'll find pretty interesting. Washington's farewell address was written by Alexander Hamilton. And as you read it, you begin to see that in Washington's world, in Washington's farewell address, the Jeffersonians take a pretty good hit. When you realize that Alexander Hamilton wrote the document, I think it begins to make sense as to why. We'll be back to this tomorrow. This is neat stuff, I think. We're at 59 minutes after the hour. First of all, I want to thank you again for the late start today. I want to invite you to be with us again tomorrow at our regular start time, which is 1 p.m. I encourage you to be careful with the cold weather. Make sure that when you hit the road, make sure that we're well prepared in case some emergency might occur. By all means, take care of each other. Be kind to each other. And hopefully we'll see you again here at the Virtual Center tomorrow. This is Bill O'Brien. Thank you.